Rain battered the empty road, the sky a rolling canvas of charcoal clouds, illuminated intermittently by flashes of lightning that split the night. Tyrone's car moved slowly, headlights slicing through the darkness, water cascading off the hood in shimmering rivulets. Every turn of the wheels sent splashes onto the puddled asphalt. The storm was relentless and loud, a drumming that seemed to echo the heartbeat in his chest. And then he saw her. She stood alone at the curb, coat plastered to her frame, umbrella inverted and useless against the storm. Her boots were soaked. Her hair clung in strands to her forehead. She shifted from foot to foot, glancing at the wet street, at passing cars that didn't slow. And then her eyes locked on Tyrone, a mixture of hope and caution there, though mostly suspicion. Tyrone's foot hovered over the brake. He knew this scene all too well, not the danger, but the unspoken judgments that clung to him wherever he went. A black man alone at night, stopping for a stranger. The assumptions would form before anyone knew his intention. He had felt the eyes, the silent whispers, the cautious glances many times in his life. Tonight he ignored them. He parked a few meters away, cut the engine, and stepped into the rain. The storm soaked him immediately, but he barely noticed. Water ran down his collar, chilled his neck, plastered his shirt to his back. "Ma'am," he called, voice calm, firm but gentle. "Do you need help?" She turned slowly, eyes wide, lips pressed together. I don't know you," she said, voice trembling, part fear, part disbelief. Tyrone nodded, understanding the caution. "I know you don't, and I know it's late, and it's raining, but you shouldn't be standing here by yourself." A pause. Thunder rolled overhead. A car passed, tires hissing across the slick asphalt. Water splashing, headlights blinding. Tyrone noticed the way she flinched, the way she sized him up as if expecting something he hadn't come to give. "I've felt this before," he thought. The doubt, the assumptions, the silent distrust, always because of the color of my skin. Yet he remained still, patient, waiting. Trust, after all, is not demanded, it is earned, and tonight he would offer what he could. Finally she nodded hesitantly. A single movement, almost imperceptible, but enough. Tyrone gestured to his car. "Hop in. I'll take you wherever you need to go." The instant she stepped in, he noticed the way her eyes lingered, cautious, scanning him, the car, even the road ahead. She clasped her hands together, knuckles white, her body tense. Tyrone started the engine. The windshield wipers began their rhythmic sweep, slicing through the rain in a steady, mechanical beat. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Her gaze shifted away, then back. You didn't have to stop," she said softly, the words barely audible over the storm. "I did," Tyrone replied simply. "Someone had to. That's all there is to it." Silence returned, heavy and tense. Tyrone could feel it pressing in, not from the storm but from her. He had seen this look countless times, caution mixed with doubt, a silent question about his intention. The same doubt society had cast on him for his entire life. People passed judgment before words were spoken, and tonight, as always, he felt the weight of their assumption. The car moved forward, tires sending sprays into puddles, the wipers keeping a relentless rhythm. Every shadow, every glimmer of light on the wet pavement reflected both the storm and the uncertainty between them. Tyrone's mind wandered briefly, not to fear, but to memory. The first time he was pulled over by a police officer for suspicious driving. The times neighbors whispered behind his back when he bought his first home. The times strangers crossed the street to avoid him. It was subtle, systemic, and exhausting, but tonight, he reminded himself, none of it mattered. The right thing to do was clear. Another flash of lightning revealed her face, pale and wet, eyes wide. Her lips parted, then closed, then parted again. I don't know why you stopped," she admitted, voice trembling, carrying the faintest edge of fear. Tyrone let the silence stretch, letting her words settle. "Because it's right," he said quietly, letting it hang between them. "It's always right to help someone in need, that's all it takes." The storm seemed to grow louder, wind gusting around the car, as if testing him. A car passed on the opposite lane, blinding headlights reflecting on the puddles. A flash of white. He caught a movement out of the corner of his eye, a shadow of judgment. Invisible but palpable, as if the universe itself doubted him. He ignored it. Minutes passed with the quiet rim of the wipers and the storm, and Tyrone felt the familiar tension of anticipation, the precarious moment before trust is given. He had seen it so many times before in his life, from strangers, from co-workers, from the world itself. The question, can he be trusted? not because of his character but because of his skin. Finally, she spoke, voice barely above the sound of the rain. "Thank you for stopping." Tyrone offered a faint smile, the first crack of relief showing on his tired face. "You don't need to thank me. It's just the right thing to do." They drove on in silence, but it was different now. The tension remained, but a fragile thread of connection had formed. Tyrone's thoughts returned to memory again. His mother teaching him to stand up for what's right. His father reminding him that integrity was invisible but powerful. The countless times he had acted rightly with no one to witness it. He had survived judgment, scorn, and disbelief his whole life. And yet he continued, not for recognition, but because he knew morality did not wait for applause. Another flash of lightning illuminated the street ahead. Tyrone caught a glimpse of her face again, cautious, but something softer, almost tentative, beginning to bloom. He allowed himself a small hope that she might understand his intentions, that some might see a black man's courage and decency without suspicion or bias. But the storm was relentless, and the night was far from over. The rain continued to pour, relentless, drumming on the roof of the car and bouncing off the windshield. Tyrone's hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter, the cold of the wet leather seeping into his fingers. Every streetlight reflected off the puddles in sharp shards of white and gold, illuminating the occasional figure that moved hastily along the sidewalks. But mostly there was emptiness. Silent judgment from a society that had always watched him with suspicion seemed to hover in every shadow. The woman shifted in the back seat again. Tyrone noticed her hands twisting nervously in her lap, the way her fingers clutched the hem of her coat, trying to wring out some sense of safety from the soaked fabric. She kept her gaze fixed outside the window, avoiding him, avoiding the small connection forming in the confined space of the car. He tried to speak again gently to ease the tension. "You're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you." Her voice trembled. "It's just, I don't know why anyone would stop for me, especially you." Tyrone swallowed. The words hung heavy in the air. He understood. She wasn't just wary of him, she was wary of the world, of strangers, of danger lurking behind every act of kindness. And beneath it all, there was the unspoken weight of society's assumption that he might be dangerous simply because of who he was. He had lived under that shadow his entire life. "I'm not dangerous," he said quietly. "I'm just trying to do what's right. That's all I can offer." Silence settled again, thicker this time, as if the storm itself had pressed down upon them. Tyrone glanced at the rearview mirror, catching the reflection of her eyes. They were wary, yes, but a flicker of something else lingered, curiosity, maybe even a faint glimmer of trust. The car hit another pole, sending a spray of water across the street, and she flinched. Tyrone noticed every reaction, every subtle movement. He had become attuned to the world noticing him, or judging him, since he was a child. The sideway glances, the quick whispers, the raised eyebrows. Moments like this reminded him that society had a long memory for prejudice, and that it often assumed the worst before knowing the truth. For a moment, his mind drifted to the countless times he had been stopped by police for no reason at all. The countless doors closed in his face, the subtle dismissals at stores and restaurants, the whispered jokes in the office corridors about that guy. The sting of those memories never fully went away, even years later. Yet, he had learned something essential. Integrity and decency were not diminished by skepticism or bias, they were strengthened. Another flash of lightning cut across the sky, momentarily illuminating the wet streets and the trembling woman in the back seat. Tyrone could see her expression clearly now, fear mixed with a cautious hope. She had almost dismissed him, almost refused his help, and yet here she was, trusting enough to stay. It was a small victory, fragile and tenuous, but real. He slowed the car as they approached a dimly lit intersection. A pedestrian hurried across, umbrella collapsing under the rain, and cast a wary glance at Tyrone. The judgment was instant, almost reflexive. A black man, alone, driving at night. Tyrone's stomach tightened. He had grown used to it, the world questioning him, questioning his intentions, questioning his very existence. But he pressed on, steady, unwavering. Morality required no audience. "Why are you being so kind?" the woman asked finally, voice soft, almost a whisper. Tyrone hesitated, searching for words. "Because someone had to. Because it's right. Because I believe in doing what's right, even when no one is watching. That's all any of us can do." Words seemed to linger in the small space of the car, mingling with the sound of rain and the hum of the engine. She said nothing, but her grip on her coat loosened slightly. The tension in the air, so heavy moments before, seemed to shift imperceptibly. Trust, however fragile, had begun to creep in. They continued driving, the city streets reflecting in pools of water, shimmering like liquid mirrors. Tyrone noticed the subtle details, the flickering neon signs of closed shops, the occasional reflection of passing headlights in shop windows, the distant sound of a siren, carried on the wind and rain. Every detail painted the world in sharp relief, a reminder that the night was both dangerous and beautiful, full of quiet stories unfolding unseen. His mind wandered again, memories of childhood flickering across his thoughts. He remembered the first time his father told him to always act with dignity, no matter how others treated him. "Your character is yours," his father had said. "They can't take it from you unless you give it away." Tyrone had lived by that lesson every day, navigating a world that often saw his skin before his soul. The car hit another puddle, jolting him slightly, and the woman flinched again. He glanced in the rear-view mirror, catching her eyes. There was a fleeting expression there now, curiosity mingled with a trace of relief. He knew the journey wasn't over, not for her, and not for him, but a bridge had begun to form between them, fragile but real. Minutes passed like hours. Tyrone navigated the wet streets with care, his thoughts a mix of strategy and reflection. Every glance from passing drivers felt weighted, every pedestrian a potential observer forming judgments. He had grown accustomed to it. Yet each instant still carried the sting of recognition. That society would always question him first and see his intentions later, if at all. Finally, the woman broke the silence again. I'm glad you stopped," she said, voice almost breaking, eyes downcast. "Most people would have just driven by." Tyrone allowed a small, tired smile to cross his face. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't make sense to anyone else," he said quietly. "It's enough that it makes sense to you." The storm showed no signs of letting up, but in that moment, within the confined space of the car, a fragile calm had emerged. Trust, once almost impossible, had begun to take root. Tyrone's hands, still gripping the wheel, relaxed slightly. He felt a quiet surge of pride, not for recognition, not for reward, but for having stayed true to what he knew was right, even in the face of doubt, even in the weight of societal judgment. Lightning flashed again, and Tyrone caught a final glimpse of her face, now softer, less guarded, the tension easing. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at her lips. He knew in that moment that the night would remember him not as a man to fear, but as a man who chose courage, who chose morality, and who chose humanity over convenience. And still, the storm raged on, each raindrop a reminder that the world remained unpredictable, harsh, and unkind. But Tyrone did not flinch. He had learned long ago that decency is often lonely, often misunderstood, but never wasted. The car moved forward, tires hissing over the wet asphalt, headlights cutting through the darkness. Tyrone's thoughts were heavy, full of memory, reflection, and quiet determination. He glanced in the rear-view mirror one last time at her eyes wide, yet starting to trust, and whispered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, "Kindness is never wasted. Courage is never unnoticed. Integrity always speaks." The wipers beat steadily against the windshield, a mechanical rhythm blending with the relentless drumming of the rain. Tyrone drove slowly, cautiously, navigating streets slick with water and shadows. The woman in the back seat remained tense, fingers entwined, eyes darting from window to mirror. Every glance felt like interrogation, though no words were spoken. Tyrone had grown accustomed to that look. It was the same look he had seen countless times in stores, offices, and streets. Curiosity, suspicion, and fear, all wrapped tightly around the color of his skin. Are you sure it's safe?" she asked finally, voice low, hesitant. Tyrone kept his eyes on the road, but his mind raced. "I've been driving these streets for years. You'll be fine," he said. But even as he spoke, he couldn't ignore the subtle reality of their environment. Dark streets, empty sidewalks, flickering streetlights, pedestrians glancing at him as if expecting trouble. In any other situation, someone else might have passed by without a second thought, but he knew the eyes followed him. Always. A figure crossed the street ahead, umbrella failing against the rain. Tyrone slowed, tires hissing across the wet asphalt. The pedestrian threw him a quick, questioning glance. Just a glance, but Tyrone felt the weight of it, the silent calculation, the unspoken assumptions. Another flash of lightning illuminated her face, wide-eyed, caught in the reflection of the puddles. She flinched as if sensing the judgment too, though she had no way of knowing how familiar Tyrone was with it. You "You're very calm," she said, voice barely above the rain. Tyrone's hands tightened on the wheel. "Experience," he replied. "You get used to the world questioning you before it even knows you. You learn to keep calm, keep moving, keep doing what's right." Her eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, and for a brief moment he thought he saw a trace of understanding, or maybe curiosity, maybe both. But then the tension returned, a shadow slipping back over her features, a reminder that trust is earned in small increments, not given freely. The car rounded a corner, and Tyrone nearly swerved as a taxi splashed through a puddle, soaking both sides of the street. The woman yelped softly, clutching her coat. Tyrone exhaled slowly. It was a small, ordinary chaos, but to her, it must have felt like another test of her instincts. And he understood. The world rarely made it easy for a black man to simply be good. "Do people often look at you like that?" she asked quietly, hesitation in her voice. He kept his eyes forward. "All the time," he admitted. "Sometimes it's curiosity, sometimes it's fear, sometimes it's judgment without a second thought. It doesn't matter how much good you do, people see the color first and the character later, if ever." Another pause. The wiper's rhythmic beat filled the space. Outside, the city murmured softly, through the rain the hum of distant traffic, the occasional shout, the splash of tires across water. Tyrone glanced at the reflections on the wet asphalt. The world seemed fractured, distorted, like looking into a mirror made of rippling water. He thought of all the times he had been stopped by police for no reason, all the times shopkeepers had watched him nervously, all the times neighbors whispered behind his back. The memories stung, but they also hardened him. Why do you keep doing good things then?" she asked finally, her voice more certain now, probing but curious. Tyrone let out a quiet sigh. "'Cause it's right. Because someone has to. Because if I don't, who will?" The car passed another pedestrian, who gave him a glance that lingered longer than necessary. Tyrone's stomach tightened slightly. He had spent decades learning to ignore that weight, the invisible gaze that evaluated and judged him in a single instant. He focused on the road, on the task at hand. Doing good, he had learned, is often lonely, but it's never wrong. The woman seemed to relax slightly, though her eyes remained vigilant. You don't get angry?" she asked softly. He shook his head, though she couldn't see him. "Sometimes I do. But I've learned that anger rarely changes things. Only action does. Only doing the right thing, even when no one sees, even when no one believes in you." The rain intensified. Headlights reflected in long streaks on the wet asphalt. Tyrone noticed a man on the sidewalk watching them pass. Another quick glance, then disappearing into the shadows. Each passing figure, each flicker of doubt from strangers, reminded him of the subtle prejudices he had endured his whole life. And yet, he pressed on, silent and steady, moral compass unwavering. For a moment the woman spoke no words. Tyrone felt the quiet between them, thick with the tension of unspoken judgments and cautious trust. The storm outside seemed to echo it. Wind howling through the city, rain tapping against the windows like impatient fingers. Tyrone's mind drifted to Mary again, his mother's gentle words teaching him to rise above fear, his father's firm guidance insisting that integrity is invisible but eternal, countless instances when he had been doubted, dismissed, or judged unfairly. Another micro-twist occurred. A car approached from the opposite direction, headlights glaring, a reckless driver speeding through the rain. Tyrone's instincts kicked in. He slowed, swerving slightly, keeping both of them safe. The woman let out a soft gasp. He nodded, reassuring without looking away from the road. "You're safe," he murmured. "I've got you." She glanced briefly at him, expression flickering between fear and admiration. Tyrone noticed the subtle change, the first sign that trust, even fragile, was beginning to form. Minutes passed. The wipers swept tirelessly across the windshield. Streetlights flickered, neon signs reflected in puddles. Tyrone noticed the small details, the crumpled newspaper in the gutter, a stray cat darting across the street, the way the rain pooled around the curb and reflected the city lights. These details, mundane to others, held weight in his mind. They reminded him of the world's complexity, its indifference, and yet the possibility of small acts of decency shining through. Finally, she spoke again, voice softer, almost a whisper. You're not like anyone I've ever met." Tyrone let a small smile cross his face. "I try not to be," he said. "I try to be better than what people expect of me. I try to show that what matters is character, not color, not circumstance, not what people assume before they know you." Another flash of lightning lit the sky. Tyrone glanced at her in the rearview mirror, catching the faintest trace of a smile. Hope, cautious but real, flickered in her eyes. It was a small victory, fragile but significant. The world could still be cruel, still judge instantly, still doubt his every intention. But tonight, in this storm, in this fleeting moment, he had done the right thing. And she had seen it, at least in part. The car rolled on, tires hissing against the slick streets. Tyrone's thoughts lingered on the past and the present. The storm outside and the small, profound act of stopping, of helping, of trusting himself to do right in a world quick to assume the worst. Every subtle glance, every quiet judgment he had endured in his life, the street, the store, the office, the police stop, the whispered skepticism of neighbors, it all seemed to converge in this moment. And yet, despite it all, he felt something he had rarely felt in the city's endless judgment. A fragile, glimmering sense of hope. Not just for the woman he had helped, but for himself. For the quiet act of courage that rippled outward, unseen, slowly changing the world. The rain had eased slightly, leaving the streets glistening like liquid mirrors under the dim glow of streetlights. Tyrone turned onto a narrow driveway lined with manicured hedges and flickering lamps. The neighborhood was quiet, almost unnervingly so. Puddles reflected the lights in fractured, wavy patterns, creating illusions of movement that played tricks on the eyes. Tyrone's tires whispered across the wet asphalt, a soft contrast to the storm's earlier roar. The woman in the back seat stiffened, her hands gripping the edge of the seat. "Here," she said, voice uncertain, trailing off. Tyrone nodded silently, pulling the car to a gentle stop beside the sidewalk. The motion of the car sent ripples across the puddles, casting distorted reflections of their faces on the wet surface. He turned in the seat slightly, offering a reassuring smile. "We're here," he said softly. "You're safe." Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and wary, searching for any hint of malice. Tyrone had seen that look before, the subtle judgment cast upon him, not for his actions, but for the assumptions society had built around his skin. She hesitated, as if weighing the danger, or perhaps the disbelief that someone like him could act without self-interest. Why did you really stop?" she asked, voice trembling slightly, a mixture of curiosity and doubt. "Most people wouldn't have. Most people would have just driven by." Tyrone exhaled slowly, his chest heavy with the weight of memories. "Because it's right," he replied. "That's all it takes. Someone has to do the right thing, even when it's inconvenient, even when the world doubts you." Her gaze softened just a fraction, but tension still lingered in her shoulders. She hesitated, glancing at the house, then back at him. Tyrone noticed her fingers tightening around the wet fabric of her coat. He could sense her inner struggle, the ingrained societal skepticism battling against the fragile trust she had begun to extend. Another flash of lightning illuminated the driveway, and for a brief moment he saw her, fully a woman, caught between fear and curiosity, vulnerability and courage. The storm had left its mark on her, but it had not broken her spirit. Tyrone felt a swell of respect. She had survived the night, just as he had survived countless nights of judgment, whispers, and bias. He opened the car door for her, rainwater dripping from the frame onto the wet pavement. "Here," he said again, gesturing toward the entrance. "You'll be safe inside." She looked at him, eyes searching, hesitant. I still don't understand why you do this. No one has ever," she stopped, words failing her. Tyrone could see the confusion, the war within her mind, as though every act of kindness she had known was being rewritten by this single, unexpected gesture. Tyrone offered a gentle nod, not rushing her. Silence fell, thick and charged, filled only by the distant hum of city life and the occasional drip of water from the roof. It was a silence that carried weight, carrying the unspoken acknowledgement of fear, judgment, and the tentative beginnings of trust. Finally she spoke again, quieter this time. "Most people, they see a man like you and assume the worst. I was expecting that." Tyrone's gaze softened. "I know," he said. "I've spent my whole life expecting it. Sometimes people see you before they see what's in your heart. Sometimes society measures worth by color, not by character." She took a cautious step toward the door, then paused, looking over her shoulder at him. You could have just driven away. You didn't have to." Her voice cracked, almost breaking. Tyrone shook his head. "I didn't have to. Maybe not, but I couldn't. Because someone has to do the right thing. And I hope someday people will see that kindness isn't weakness, and courage isn't defined by what the world expects." The woman's hand rested lightly on the door handle. She glanced at him one last time, searching his face for any trace of duplicity, and finally, with a faint, hesitant smile, she stepped out. Tyrone watched her, noting the small shift in her posture, the subtle easing of tension. Trust, fragile and delicate, had begun to form, though it would take time to fully bloom. As she disappeared into the house, a quiet sense of satisfaction filled Tyrone, but it was tempered by the reality of the world outside. He had done the right thing, yes, but society rarely rewarded such deeds. The judgment he carried, both subtle and systemic, remained a constant companion. Still, he had acted with integrity, and that, he knew, was worth more than any applause. He closed the car door, rainwater dripping from the frame, and stood for a moment, listening to the storm's residual symphony, the patter of water, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional cry of a bird startled by the lightning. Each sound reminded him that the world was alive, complex, and full of contradiction. Acts of goodness were small ripples in a vast ocean, but even ripples mattered. Tyrone started the engine and pulled away, the tires sending sprays of water across the street. As he drove, his mind wandered to the countless times he had acted rightly with no one to witness it, holding doors for strangers, intervening when someone was being treated unfairly, offering help where it was needed without expectation. Always, the world measured him first by the color of his skin, then by his action. And always, he endured not for recognition, but for the simple truth that morality is never contingent on others' approval. Another micro-twist. A neighbor's window opened slightly as he passed, eyes peering out, judgment hanging in the air like a heavy fog. Tyrone felt the familiar sting, but he did not falter. Integrity does not bend to doubt. Character does not need validation. He focused on the road ahead, on the act of kindness he had offered, and on the ripple it might create, however small. The woman's house receded behind him in the distance, lights glowing warmly against the night. Tyrone allowed himself a moment of reflection. He had faced subtle prejudice, systemic bias, and direct skepticism his whole life. And yet, tonight he had acted rightly. He had made a choice that defied assumptions, challenged judgment, and honored morality. He knew the journey was far from over. Life rarely rewards decency immediately, and society often resists acknowledging it. But he also knew that courage, kindness, and integrity, once exercised, leave a mark, sometimes unseen, sometimes delayed, but always real. As Tyrone's car disappeared into the wet streets, rain slicked and glimmering under streetlight, the tension of the night began to ease, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. Trust had been extended, courage had been exercised, and morality had prevailed, at least for a moment. The storm outside reflected the storm within, both fierce and unyielding, yet capable of quiet, profound transformation. The morning light was pale and hesitant, slipping between curtains and casting faint shadows across Tyrone's modest living room. The storm from the night before it passed, leaving streets slick and shimmering, dew clinging to grass, and leaves like scattered diamonds. Tyrone's coffee sat untouched on the counter, steam rising in delicate spirals. He had been awake for hours, mind restless, replaying the events of last night with the precision of a memory etched into muscle and bone. He heard the faint hum of tires on wet asphalt outside, the occasional call of a crow, the distant chatter of early risers. But beneath the calm, an undercurrent of tension lingered, a subtle, familiar weight, whispers, judgments, eyes that observed him silently. Even in the quiet of the morning, society had a way of reminding him that he was always seen first as other before being recognized as human. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Tyrone paused, heart quickening. He wasn't expecting anyone. Slowly, he moved toward the door, each step deliberate. The peephole revealed no one, just the faint shadow of a figure disappearing down the sidewalk. He opened the door cautiously. Nothing but wet pavement, glistening under the early sunlight. Tyrone closed the door, a sigh escaping him. This was life, acts of courage often unnoticed, morality often questioned, kindness frequently doubted. And yet he had learned long ago that waiting for validation was a trap. One acts rightly not for recognition, but because integrity demands it. Minutes later, the phone rang. Tyrone's hand hesitated over the receiver. He had been reluctant to engage with the outside world this morning, wary of judgment and expectation alike. Still, he lifted the receiver, voice calm but cautious. "Hello?" A polite, professional voice answered, tinged with urgency. "Mr. Johnson." This is Miss Carter. I wanted to thank you for your assistance last night. The woman you helped, she spoke very highly of you. She insisted we contact you immediately. Tyrone's brow furrowed, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Ah, thank you. I just did what anyone would do, he said modestly. Miss Carter's tone softened, almost apologetic. I understand, but, she insisted, you helped her when others ignored her. And she wanted you to know that your actions did not go unnoticed. Tyrone felt a knot in his chest. Recognition, finally, it seemed, yet he remained wary. Society had rarely rewarded morality so openly. Often it demanded humility even while questioning one's motives. Still, the acknowledgement stirred something fragile within him, a flicker of hope, a tentative validation of decades of unseen decency. The call ended, leaving a quiet hum in the room. Tyrone sat in the chair by the window, watching the world outside. The streets glistened, reflecting the morning sun, but he could sense the subtle eyes of neighbors and passers-by, measuring him, judging him, forming assumptions without knowing the whole story. He had faced it his entire life, these whispers of doubt, these silent tests of character. A micro-twist unfolded. As he sipped his coffee, a neighbor peeked through the blinds across the street, eyebrows raised in suspicion. Tyrone met the gaze for a moment, offering a faint nod, then looked away. The acknowledgement hung unspoken between them. The world may doubt you, but your actions remain unchanged. He reflected on the countless mornings of judgment, the subtle races that seeped into daily life. The clerk who assumed he was trouble, the teacher who doubted his potential, the neighbors who whispered behind closed doors. Each instance was a reminder that society often sees skin before character, assumptions before reality. And yet, the morning sun was breaking through, light spilling across the pavement, a quiet counterpoint to the skepticism. Another micro-twist. A car passed slowly, windows down, a group of young men casting him a glance filled with curiosity and subtle suspicion. Tyrone felt the familiar pulse of awareness. He had learned to navigate these moments, to respond not with anger but with calm, with dignity. Doing so had become second nature, a shield forged by years of enduring misjudgment. Minutes later, he received another call, this time directly from the woman. Her voice, soft but firm, carried gratitude and a quiet tension. Mr. Johnson, I just wanted to say thank you. Truly, I don't often meet people like you. You didn't have to stop, and yet you did. I won't forget it. Tyrone hesitated, words failing him momentarily. It was the right thing to do, he finally said. I hope you're safe now. That's all that matters. Her voice softened. You're more than safe, you're remarkable, and I want to make sure you know that your actions are seen, even if the world usually doesn't notice people like you. The acknowledgement struck Tyrone with unexpected force. For decades, society had overlooked him, questioned him, judged him. And yet here was someone insisting that his morality, his courage, his simple act of human decency mattered. It was validation, yes, but more than that, it was proof that decency ripples outward, unseen but real, touching lives in ways that cannot always be measured. Tyrone set down the phone, gazing out the window at the quiet street. The reflections of sunlight on wet asphalt reminded him that the world could be harsh, indifferent, even cruel. But moments of recognition, moments of kindness acknowledged, were a counterweight, fragile yet enduring. He thought of the woman, of her cautious trust, of the hesitation in her eyes, and of the subtle ways society had already questioned him before understanding him. The contrast was sharp, painful, but ultimately affirming. He had acted rightly even when unobserved, even when doubted, and now, slowly, the world was beginning to notice. Another micro-twist emerged. A text message from Miss Carter appeared on his phone, an invitation to meet, a hint of further acknowledgement. A subtle promise that the night's kindness might have consequences beyond imagination. Tyrone's chest tightened with anticipation, the tension of unknown outcomes blending with a growing sense of hope. He rose from the chair, pacing slightly, mind racing through memories of previous indignity. The countless times he had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed, or misjudged. Yet, each memory reinforced a single truth: integrity is not contingent on recognition. Decency is never wasted. Courage is measured not by applause, but by the willingness to act rightly even when the world doubts you. Tyrone stepped to the window, looking down the glistening street. The morning was alive with subtle sounds, the distant honk of a horn, the chatter of early pedestrians, the gentle rustle of leaves damp with rain. Each sound carried weight, a reminder that life continued, indifferent to prejudice but attentive to action. And then, in the quiet tension of the moment, a thought settled in his mind sometimes. The world takes its time to reward morality, but it always notices eventually. The flicker of acknowledgement from the one, the subtle hints from Mescar to the ripple of recognition in an indifferent society. It was a beginning, fragile but unmistakable. Tyrone exhaled slowly, allowing a quiet smile to touch his lips. The morning was no longer just a reflection of judgment or skepticism. It was a canvas of potential, of hope, of the subtle but profound recognition that decency matters. He sat back down with his coffee, the warmth seeping into his hands, into his chest, into the quiet corners of his spirit. The world outside remained unpredictable, full of subtle biases and unspoken judgments, but he had acted rightly. And sometimes, that is enough to change everything. Tyrone arrived at work later that morning, the streets glistening under the remnants of the storm. His car tires hissed over wet pavement, leaving streaks of reflection in their wake. He took a deep breath before stepping out, adjusting his coat and straightening his posture. Today would be like any other, judged, observed, and constantly measured by the assumptions others carried about him. But he had learned long ago to meet that world with patience, integrity, and quiet resolve. The office lobby was bright, artificial light reflecting off the polished floors. Tyrone's footsteps echoed softly as he approached the reception desk. The receptionist offered a polite smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. Tyrone had noticed the subtle hesitation whenever he entered this building, the way people evaluated him before greeting him. It was subtle, yet piercing the silent questioning of who he was and what he deserved. He took the elevator to the 4th floor, each step a reminder of the small battles waged daily against prejudice. The hum of fluorescent lights, the quiet clatter of keyboards, the occasional murmur of conversation filled the office. Tyrone passed by coworkers, some nodding politely, others glancing away as if afraid to make eye contact. The unspoken question lingered: can he be trusted? Or does he not belong here? At his desk, Tyrone settled in, opening his laptop and reviewing reports. The numbers and data demanded his focus, but he could feel the tension in the room, the subtle weight of observation pressing down on him. He remembered countless mornings like this, moments where every decision, every movement, every word was scrutinized, not just for merit, but through the lens of skin color. A coworker, Jason, leaned over his desk. Tyrone, are you sure you did that client presentation right? Heard some people were talking, not sure it's how they expected it. There was a hint of smirk, almost playful, yet Tyrone caught the subtle implication: doubt, bias, skepticism. He straightened, meeting Jason's gaze calmly. Yes, I did. The numbers were accurate, and the projections are sound. That's all that matters. Jason chuckled lightly, the sound carrying a subtle edge of condescension. Right, just making sure, yo? Tyrone returned to his work, allowing a small exhale, resisting the temptation to correct the judgment with anger. He had learned that integrity is not measured by proving yourself to others, it is demonstrated through action and consistency. Another micro-twist occurred. During the morning meeting, Tyrone presented his analysis confidently. As he spoke, he noticed subtle glances, coworkers exchanging looks, a few whispering quietly, perhaps underestimating his expertise. A senior manager interrupted mid-presentation. Tyrone, are you sure about these figures? It seems unconventional. Tyrone met the manager's eyes steadily. Yes, I double-checked everything. The methodology is sound and the projections are accurate. The room fell silent. Some colleagues shifted uncomfortably, while others avoided eye contact entirely. Tyrone could feel the undercurrent, skepticism laced with bias, subtle but present. And yet, the truth was in the work, and he allowed the facts to speak louder than the whispers. He thought back to moments from his past, teachers doubting him, neighbors whispering assumptions, strangers sizing him up before understanding him. Each instance had prepared him for this environment, a world where morality and competence are constantly weighed against prejudice. He remained calm, resolute, and unwavering. Midday brought another test. Tyrone was called into the HR office unexpectedly. The conversation began politely but quickly revealed its underlying tension. Tyrone, the HR manager said, voice neutral but pointed, we've received some concerns about your conduct. Some employees feel uncomfortable. We just want to make sure everything is appropriate. Tyrone felt a tightness in his chest, a familiar mixture of frustration and patience. I've conducted myself professionally at all times, he replied evenly. If there are specific incidents, I'm happy to discuss them. Otherwise, I assure you, I am fulfilling my responsibilities appropriately. The manager paused, then nodded slowly. We just want transparency, that's all. The words were polite, but Tyrone could sense the subtle implication that his very presence, his skin color, his history of being judged, had created discomfort for others. It was a microcosm of the world at large, systemic bias dressed in polite language. Tyrone left the office, returning to his desk with a steady breath. The weight of judgment lingered, but he refused to let it define him. Integrity is a quiet act, not a performance, and he had spent a lifetime proving, not to the world, but to himself, that decency is unwavering. Another micro-twist arrived via email, a note from a client expressing surprise at his thoroughness and professionalism. They acknowledged his insight and attention to detail, contrasting sharply with the subtle doubts of coworkers. Tyrone allowed himself a small smile, a quiet victory in a day filled with micro-challenges. Yet, the day was far from over. Tyrone noticed whispers by the water cooler, subtle glances when he passed by, and an intentional avoidance from certain colleagues. It was systemic, embedded, invisible, yet unmistakable. He had grown used to it, learned to navigate it, but it never dulled the sting. At lunch, he stepped outside, the sun filtering through clouds, puddles reflecting fractured light. He breathed deeply, letting the warmth touch his skin. In the quiet, he allowed himself reflection on the night he helped the stranded woman, on the storm, on the ripple effects of his actions, on the countless micro-moments of judgment and subtle racism he faced daily. Each memory was a reminder. Courage and integrity often go unnoticed, but they create invisible waves that shape lives. A coworker approached with a tentative smile. Hey, I just wanted to say that client feedback you received, impressive work. The words were simple but genuine. Tyrone nodded, acknowledging it silently, appreciating the small validation in a day otherwise dominated by doubt. He returned inside, resuming his work, focusing on the tasks at hand. Each spreadsheet, each report, each call was an opportunity to demonstrate competence and integrity. And yet, beneath the routine, the undercurrent of systemic bias persisted. Tyrone had learned long ago that morality and excellence are tested not just in grand moments, but in the accumulation of small, consistent acts of decency in a world prone to judgment. The afternoon brought another micro-twist. A client called unexpectedly, requesting clarification on a project. Tyrone provided precise, thoughtful answers, his professionalism unshaken. When the call ended, he realized the subtle victory. Perception was changing slowly through undeniable action. Integrity speaks louder than assumption. By the end of the workday, Tyrone felt the exhaustion settle into his bones. A fatigue born not of labor but of constant moral vigilance. Yet, he also felt quiet pride. He had navigated subtle and direct racism, systemic bias, and skepticism, remaining true to himself and his principles. Every whispered judgment, every skeptical glance, every subtle doubt had been met with calm consistency and action. As he left the office, the city streets shimmered under the early evening light. Tyrone exhaled, allowing himself a moment of quiet reflection. Life was full of micro-challenges, subtle prejudices, and systemic obstacles, but courage, integrity, and decency were unyielding. And sometimes the ripples of those actions reached further than anyone could anticipate. The sun had fully risen now, bathing the city in warm golden light that glinted off wet streets still shimmering from last night's storm. Tyrone stepped outside his modest home, coffee in hand, feeling a strange mix of calm and anticipation. The events of the previous night, the rain, the stranded woman, the storm, the quiet chaos had settled like echoes in his chest. But something told him today would not be ordinary. And then it appeared, a sleek black Rolls Royce, gleaming under the morning sun, rounding the corner with the quiet authority of something remarkable. Tyrone froze for a heartbeat, disbelief and curiosity mixing in a potent swirl. The car came to a smooth stop, and the door opened. She stepped out, the woman he had helped in the storm, her eyes bright and unwavering, carrying the weight of last night and the gratitude of a life she could not forget. Tyrone's chest tightened. Memories of the storm, the fear, the judgment, the silent whispers of the world returned all at once. And now she had come to acknowledge him. Tyrone, she said, voice steady yet tinged with emotion, I wanted to make sure you understood what your actions meant, not just to me, but to the ripple of people you've touched. Tyrone shook his head softly, words caught in his throat. I just did what was right. Anyone could have. No, she interrupted gently. Most would have driven past. Most would have assumed, judged, ignored. But you. Her hand rested briefly on his shoulder, grounding him in the truth of her words. You acted with courage and integrity, and that cannot go unnoticed. A subtle micro-twist revealed itself. Her assistant stepped forward, handing Tyrone a neatly sealed envelope. The formal gesture carried weight. A quiet acknowledgement that his single act of kindness had consequences far beyond imagination. Tyrone accepted it, his hands trembling slightly, heart-pounding. Inside was more than money or acknowledgement. It was a symbol, a token of recognition for a life spent doing the right thing despite society's doubts. He glanced at the neighborhood. Passers-by were slowing, glances turning from curiosity to admiration. Whispers of judgment had shifted into murmurs of respect. Tyrone felt the subtle power of a moral victory, small acts of integrity, rippling outward, transforming perception, challenging bias. I want you to know, she continued, voice unwavering, your story, your courage deserves to be shared. People need to see that goodness exists, even when the world doubts it. Acts of decency are stronger than prejudice, and yours will inspire countless others. Tyrone exhaled, emotion swelling in his chest. For decades he had endured cell and direct racism, systemic bias, whispered doubts, and questioning stares. And yet here he stood, validated not through applause, but through recognition of the truth. Morality and courage persist even when overlooked. The Rolls Royce engine purred as she stepped back into the car. The vehicle's sleek form reflecting sunlight, a metaphor for the unexpected recognition that life sometimes delivers to those who act rightly without expectation. Tyrone watched it fade down the street, leaving trails of reflection on the asphalt, and felt a profound shift within himself. Alone in the quiet of the morning, Tyrone reflected on every micro-moment of injustice he had endured, the subtle racism of co-workers, the whispered suspicions of neighbors, the systemic obstacles that had shadowed his life. Every slight, every judgment, every moment of unfairness had prepared him for this day. And now, at long last, integrity had triumphed. He looked skyward, the golden light warming his face, feeling a deep, quiet hope for the first time in years. The world could still doubt, mismeasure, and judge, but courage and morality had a way of asserting themselves, unstoppable and enduring. Tyrone addressed the invisible audience, imagining millions witnessing his story. To everyone who has ever been overlooked, doubted, or dismissed, your integrity matters, your courage matters. Even when the world fails to notice, your goodness has power. Let it ripple outward. Let it change lives, silently, profoundly, and eternally. The camera of his imagination lingered on the neighborhood, the now awakened city, neighbors observing. With newfound respect, subtle acknowledgement spreading like sunlight through the streets. The story of a single act of decency, a single courageous choice, had begun to transform the world in ways unseen but undeniable. A final pause settled over Tyrone, the quiet aftermath of storm and struggle replaced by peace, validation, and moral victory. The lessons of the night, the morning, and every judgment endured were now complete. Courage, integrity, and morality had been honored. And for those who doubted, the story served as living proof. Good deeds echo beyond expectation, and the human heart is capable of enduring, rising, and transforming the world. As the sun climbed higher, Tyrone turned back toward his home, every step a quiet assertion of dignity and hope. The Rolls Royce, the gratitude, the acknowledgement, they were more than tokens. They were the culmination of a life lived rightly. He paused one last time, addressing the audience. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of the power of integrity, share it. Talk about it. Let the world see that goodness cannot be silenced, courage cannot be hidden, and integrity always matters. Together we can ensure that kindness and morality ripple farther than hate and prejudice ever could. The screen fades slowly, golden light glimmering off the wet streets, leaving behind the echo of moral victory, emotional resolution, and hope.